Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining Transportation for America for our informational webinar on our new Cultural Corridor Consortium RFP, Request for Proposals, for the 2017 and 2018 year. So just a little bit about who we are, Transportation for America. We are a national coalition of local elected officials, chambers of commerce, metropolitan planning organizations, businesses, and civic organizations that are working to ensure that the federal, state, and local governments have resources to step up and provide better outcomes for the public and answer changing demands of the 21st century. Transportation for America has an arts and culture team as well who's invested in thinking through how arts and culture can be incorporated into today's transportation challenges. Today's presenters are myself, Mallory Nizam, the Arts and Culture Outreach Associate at Transportation for America. Also joining us is Ben Stone, the Director of Arts and Culture for Smart Growth America and Transportation for America. And Kathleen Ferrier, Director of Advocacy for Circulate San Diego, who is also a current grantee. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ben Stone. And one more note, in the bottom left-hand corner, if anyone has any questions throughout today's webinar, there's a chat box at the bottom left-hand corner. Feel free to type in any of your questions there, and we'll compile them and get to questions at the end of the webinar. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Mallory. Hi, everyone. So the purpose of today is, of course, to go over this grant opportunity and just to get a couple of minutes to set the stage for our goals behind the grant, and then we'll get into some of the details and eligibility requirements, and of course hear from Kathleen about her experience working with this grant, and then at the end here again from Mallory about some of the logistics with this proposal opportunity. So we, Transportation for America, we're fortunate to have received now a couple of years of funding from the Kresge Foundation to support this work, both some of our internal work with our Scenic route research guide, hopefully you've all seen, creativeplacemaking.t4america.org, as well as to give out these sub-grants through the Cultural Corridor Consortium, first in Portland, Oregon, San Diego, California, Nashville, Tennessee, and now in 3 new communities we'll be determining over the next couple months. As you see on your screen here, our goals in doing this work with the support of the Kresge Foundation is to build the field of what we and many others call creative placemaking, or working with artists and cultural workers to drive solutions to today's transportation challenges. We're also looking for new models of working with artistic practice in transportation projects and figuring out some great new case studies that we can support that we can then share with other communities. And we're looking to really drive sustainable change. So we're less interested in working in a community where we do a one-off project, and with our grant funding, there's the opportunity to do something really great. And then when we're done after a year, that work basically falls through the cracks and nothing else happens. We're looking instead, as you'll hear from Kathleen, some things are happening in San Diego, to use the funding that we provide to be basically a pilot project that convinces others to take up this work and support this work either with direct funding or with perhaps some changes to permitting processes or other kinds of ways of supporting this work after the year that we fund. So that's a pretty important goal of ours. The grant, of course, includes a grant, direct sub-grant from us of $50,000 per community, so that's $150,000 total, $50,000 per community. There's a couple of requirements in there to both document the work that you are doing and to provide some level of measurement. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But it also includes guidance from myself, from Mallory, and from other people within both the Smart Growth America umbrella and the Transportation for America organization, which could include policy experts, team members from our Complete Streets Coalition, or depending on whatever the project may be, it may involve other people as well. So we have people standing by ready to assist with some of the technical aspects of this work to help make it run as smoothly as possible. And that'll be done over regular conference calls, through some insight and in-person visits. and a peer learning network as well, the last thing on the screen. And we find that, and you'll hear from Kathleen about this as well, but we find that to be really useful in the sense that the problems and challenges facing one community are usually pretty similar to other communities, and everybody is often in a different phase of a project, but there's a lot that can be learned by having regular calls and then having a couple in-person meetings so that people can share ideas face-to-face. You go to the next slide. So hopefully this slide makes clear that we're very flexible and open to any sorts of applicants. We are not restricting to nonprofits or to government leads or to private sector leads or anything like that. We really want the best possible team to come together to do this work, and we'll leave it up to the applicants to tell us who the best team is in each case. There's no restriction on size. We've already received a few questions about whether or not this needs to be a large city, since we're currently funding projects in 3 fairly large cities at the moment. We're interested in rural proposals and suburban proposals and proposals from small and large cities. And we don't have any eligibility requirements related to location. So it's really just anywhere within the United States. The only restriction there is that because we've already worked in Portland, Oregon, Nashville, and San Diego, we are looking for new cities. So really those are the only restricted areas in the country. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So a couple things that as you all are starting to put together your proposals, hopefully you're already well into that process now, but as you continue to move forward on that, some things to think about that we think make a strong proposal, just to run through these quickly, are relationship to metropolitan planning organization or some sort of equivalent or larger regional transportation agency or some group that has the ability to control important decisions related to transportation in the future. We don't want work to be done necessarily in isolation. We want at least some connection to larger forces that have control over money and other ways of supporting projects. We want a real partnership between different sectors. We don't necessarily want a proposal to come from an art collective that hasn't talked to a transportation agency or a transportation agency that has not really talked to any artists or arts organizations within their community. We want people to come together and be willing to actually tackle some of these challenges in a very collaborative kind of way, not just in a surface way where they're marking someone down as a participant without having them really genuinely involved in the project. We want this is really probably the most important one, we want a really clearly identified transportation challenge and opportunity. So not necessarily a project that is sort of tangentially related to a transportation challenge, but something that explains how the proposed arts and culture strategy that you're going to use and use our sub-grant to support directly addresses some sort of transportation challenge. And transportation challenges could be involving walkability challenges, issues of complete streets, station design, planning exercises to figure out what the new transportation system should be or should look like. It could be any phase of the project, but we want that to be as clear as possible so that we understand what the work is going to achieve. We have a pretty important focus on equity, so we want to understand why these funds are needed to be used in the community in which they are proposed to be used and how that does drive more equitable distribution of transportation projects. We would like you to figure out some self-determined way of measuring the impact of the work that you're going to be doing, so setting up some goals from the beginning and telling us what you're going to achieve, and then explaining how you're going to measure whether or not you've achieved that success. And as I mentioned before, an interest in sustaining this work beyond the year in which we will be funding the work. We are going to move on to Kathleen. Before we do that, a couple other things to mention. One is that we, of course, are only funding 3 communities. There were over 400 people that signed up for this webinar, so I have a feeling there'll be more than 3 that probably apply. We're also in the process of putting together a couple other ways of supporting communities through some technical assistance workshops. So we'll be in touch about that. We're not quite ready to unveil all the details, but in the next few months we'll have more information about that. So we encourage you to apply, of course, because we hope you'll get funding. We hope that you'll get funding this round, but there's other opportunities, and we'll be excited to hear your ideas for other potential opportunities in the future. And 2, we've intentionally set up the timeline for this project so that there's a month overlap between the grantees that are being supported now and the new cities and new communities that will be selected beginning in August. So part of that is designed to be a peer learning opportunity where you hear from folks in San Diego, Portland, and Nashville about the work they've done. You'll hear from Kathleen now briefly, but you get much more insight into the 3 projects that have been going on recently before you all begin your work. So with that, I will stop there and hand things off to Kathleen.
Great. Thanks, Ben and Mallory, and hello, everyone. I'm so pleased to be able to participate in this webinar today. This grant from T4A and Kresge has been a really positive experience for Circulate San Diego and our partner, the City Heights Community Development Corporation. Circulate San Diego is a nonprofit serving the San Diego region, and our mission is to create excellent mobility choices and vibrant, healthy neighborhoods. And I will talk briefly about what we've done with the grant funding that we've received, as well as lessons learned. Next slide. So first, just to orient folks, we have focused this project in City Heights, the City Heights neighborhood of San Diego, which is our most culturally diverse neighborhood within the city. This shows you just with the stars where it's located, and the transit corridor, the cultural corridor that's identified. We, unlike the 2 other cities, have actually identified 2 corridors. One of them is El Cajon Boulevard, and another is University Avenue. These are both east-west corridors that run through City Heights. They happen to be commercial corridors, walkable corridors. There's a lot of pedestrian activity, a lot of cars, and they also happen to be are home to the bus lines with the highest ridership in the city. So there's a lot of activity there. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And so the challenges that we wanted to address, and that quite frankly we have been working on for quite some time, both at Circulate and within the City Heights CDC, are safe walkability and safe access to the transit stops, obviously for safety, but also just for folks to improve the overall transit ridership experience. This slide shows the corridors for San Diego that are identified as Vision Zero corridors, if you're familiar with that movement. These are basically the corridors in the city that had the highest crash rates among other corridors. And you can see City Heights there identified with the letter C. That top blue street is El Cajon Boulevard, and H just below it is University Avenue. So these are really definitive kinds of transportation corridors that run through City Heights. And I should also mention that El Cajon Boulevard, in addition to having frequent buses, it's also home to the newest bus rapid transit line in San Diego. So that's one difference with San Diego from the other 2 pilot cities. We have a BRT already running. The 2 other cities were focusing on the planning of the BRT coming. So we wanted to, again, address the challenge of improving the overall transit ridership experience for people in City Heights. Next slide. So in talking about how the grant resources have helped us to promote arts and culture strategies for the transportation challenges, we decided to, again, focus on the existing BRT stations, and one in particular that is really in the epicenter of City Heights. And these pictures, hopefully they can show you. On the bottom picture, 43rd Street stop is right in front of a new YMCA building that has literally thousands of people walking to that facility every day. And the BRT stop is there. And then there's another one across the street, which is shown in the picture above, which is right next to a U-Haul station, a U-Haul property. Next slide. So we worked with the community to identify, through a workshop and through all kinds of different outreach that we did, looked at how can we improve the ridership experience in this area within these 2 stops. We didn't want to take on too much. We wanted to really focus our efforts on these 2 stops. And I think what's really great, one of the lessons learned from this project is in doing this, oftentimes in planning exercises, we'll go into a community and talk about what are the things that you want to change in your community. And with Transportation for America, we learned how to reframe that conversation and instead talk about what are the cultural assets in this community that we want to amplify. and it's been a very positive experience. It's been a very positive conversation that has come out of that. And so through our workshops, we were able to talk with residents about what those assets are, to document them. And then the pictures shown in this slide show a demonstration placemaking event that we had one day where we involved the community in several art projects, physical art projects, beautifying the area around the BRT stop that was identified. Next slide. And so that is the work that we were doing on Elkhorn Boulevard. We also wanted to address some of the challenges we have on University Avenue. Because City Heights is such a rich cultural neighborhood, we wanted to work in that realm. And on the eastern side of the community is a heavy concentration of Somali residents. And in the slide up on the top left shows a vacant area that's off to the side of University Avenue that is down the street from a very popular mosque in the community, as well as several retail stores where folks are walking all the time. And so our partner, the City Heights Community CDC, worked with the Somali population in a very careful, collaborative process to engage that community and to talk about what are ways that they could work together in, again, improving safety, but also improving the area so that it can reflect the rich cultural history that exists in City Heights. And so the picture on the left shows the before. The picture on the bottom shows an after. After about a year and a half of work, we unveiled this new gathering place in that area. And that was very much a grassroots, community-led initiative in that the design came from them, and this is only the beginning of it, but you can see the benches that were installed there, and folks are sitting around game tables that display a traditional Somali game called Laddu. And we're currently now working on further improving this area. And go to the next slide, please. Not just that particular gathering place, but the area around it. And the picture at the top shows a wall that's across the street where we're working with the community members now to develop a mural design that will go there that, again, reflects the Somali culture and history. So next slide. In addition to that work and really to lay out for others in San Diego what we have learned through this grant process, we wanted to document it through what ended up being a report. If you can go to the next slide, it'll show the cover of that report. At the time that we were doing this work in City Heights, there's been interest in placemaking around the city of San Diego and other communities, and we found that we were hitting a lot of dead ends as far as being able to work with the city in implementing some simple projects in the public right-of-way. And in fact, we had some serious challenges where certain areas or things that had been installed were taken out. And so we documented that process. We talked about the projects that we were working on in City Heights and defining placemaking, how it can interrelate with transportation and lessons learned, and we wrote it in this paper called A Place for Placemaking in San Diego, and use this to now work with city leaders to develop a new placemaking policy for the entire city of San Diego, and we're going through that process right now. Can you go up one slide back? I wanted to just touch on some of the lessons learned from this project. Again, one is reframing the conversation, as I mentioned before, from talking about problems to really amplifying the community assets that exist. And that's really been a great lesson to reframe that conversation. As Ben mentioned, it really has been helpful to hear from our cohort cities in Nashville and Portland because there are so many similarities among our cities working on transportation corridors and culturally rich communities. We've been able to learn a lot from one another, and we've all been experimenting, so to speak, with different kinds of placemaking ideas. The work that we've done in City Heights has really been a catalyst for other placemaking projects in City Heights along are along that same corridor. Really great stuff where we've been able to revitalize vacant properties and to, in one example, create a weekly market, which is also right next to the transit station that I showed in the earlier slides. And then lastly, the grant has helped put Circulate San Diego and the City Heights CDC in a leadership position in San Diego to help other organizations with similar kinds of projects, but then also to craft this new policy that's moving forward in the city. And as far as the sustainability of it, this policy will certainly assist in that area. And then also we've been fortunate that the city has identified some funding for placemaking. So one, with the policy, it's the first time that the city is actually recognizing what placemaking is and what that means for communities. And then through our Economic Development Department, they're putting aside $350,000 in either revolving loans or grant funding to community organizations to do placemaking over the next year. And we hope that that will be successful so that that can be funding that will continue in the long term. And I think that's all I wanted to say, other than for those on the phone, if you haven't checked out the Scenic Route Guide that Transportation for America put together, I would encourage you to take a look because it's a really great, dynamic, helpful resource. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kathleen. This is Mallory again, and we'll make sure to share that Scenic Route resource with all of you that are on this webinar. So I wanted to move to what you need to submit, what our required application material consists of. And online we have an application form that is available for you to fill out either directly into the form, or you can download it as a PDF and you can send that into us as an email with the attachments that are listed here. So the attachments required include a budget, so a sense of how you'll use this $50K for your proposed project. We're also interested in your plans for measuring the success of your project, and feel free to define success as you see fit for the needs of your community and your particular transportation challenge or opportunity. And also feel free to be creative with how you measure. There's a lot of conversation in this space right now about how we should be measuring, what we should be measuring. So we're interested in traditional as well as innovative ideas for how we measure success. We also recommend but do not require a letter of support from the local NPO, because as Ben mentioned earlier, we're really looking for deep partnerships that are going to allow this work to thrive in the year that we're funding, but also to begin a larger body of work and movement within the community that you're working in. We'd also love to see as an attachment a map that shows us where the proposed project site is. And this can be a small specific site, it can be a larger area or multiple sites, but we'd like to have a little bit of visual context to understand where this transportation project is within the larger realm of the community. And then lastly, to really flesh out your idea, the community that you're proposing to work in, the site, we would like to see 3 pieces of supporting media. So that can be anywhere from photo to video or anything else that you have that's helpful to give us a sense of the kind of project that you're proposing, as well as to illustrate the specific transportation challenge or opportunity that you are solving. Next slide. And let's run through timeline briefly. So we've issued the request for proposals already, and the deadline for the submission is June 2nd. That's a Friday. And we close out at 5 p.m. Eastern. So if you're in a different time zone, just be mindful that 5 p.m. is for Eastern time. We'll review those applications and get back to everyone on June 30th. And then the granting period begins in August, and as was mentioned previously, that's the month of overlap. So that month, both of the cohorts will be working together. We'll have an in-person meeting with all of our grantees in the winter or spring of the following year, and then funding runs through the end of July 2018. Next slide. Great. So I think we are ready to open up to the question segment of the webinar, and thank you to all of you that have been submitting questions over the last half hour or so. I'm going to just go through some of the questions that we've received, and feel free to continue asking them in that bottom left-hand corner as we move through. So some of these questions have already been addressed. So let's see. We've got, the question is, can multiple proposals be submitted from one location? I'm going to open that up to everyone. Ben, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah, it's a good question, something we've heard from a few folks. In the perfect world, every community, of course, would come together and submit the one best proposal that's possible, but given that this is place-based work, we understand that there might be more than one place in a certain community that would like to receive this funding and this support. So the short answer is yes, we are open to having more than one proposal. It would be highly unlikely we would fund more than one within the same community, but we certainly would welcome and will not disqualify more than one proposal from the same community.
Great. There was also a question just to clarify the cities that we've already worked in and therefore the locations that are not eligible this round. And those locations are Nashville, Portland, and San Diego. There was also a question about the city versus counties in some of these regions. And I think we're going to have to get back to that question when we send out our follow-up email. This is a great question. Would the inclusion of technology and transportation outlets fall within our scope? And I would say yes. I think, again, we're looking for specific transportation opportunities or challenges. So if this tech-related project is really solving a challenge or an opportunity using arts and culture as a tool, I think it would definitely fall in our scope of work.
Yeah, so the only reason it might not, I agree it likely will, but the only reason it might not is that there wasn't a place-based component to it. We're really interested in helping to support specific places, so something that is behind-the-scenes technology that there is no clear explanation as to how it impacts place would be not as competitive.
Yeah, that's a great point. So this is another question. Does the project have to be related to transit corridors? Because I know the name corridor is in the title. And are projects focused on biking and walking also eligible?
I can take that one. Yes, the projects that involve biking and walking are definitely eligible. Active transportation is certainly something we're interested in supporting as well. Corridor, yes, is a good question about corridor since it has a pretty specific definition. Our reason for including that word is back to my previous point that we're looking for place-based change and place-based support. So we are interested, it doesn't necessarily have to be a traditional corridor in the sense of a linear space that encompasses a few blocks and anything quite that definitive, but we are looking for some sort of place-based work. And I keep saying that word, but what I mean by that is rather than a system-wide improvement that covers a very large region, we're interested more in specific places and the local stakeholders that are using those places as well.
Great. We've got another question about the phase of a project. So Julia is asking, can the project be something that's already in process, or does it have to be unique to this application process? I guess the question is, do we have to start a new project with this funding, or can we support something that's already in motion?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For the 3 cities we've been supporting, we're actually supporting projects that are already in motion, and we understand that given that it's a $50,000 grant in a 1-year grant period, it's unlikely that one could go through the entire planning, community engagement, design, implementation phase of a transportation project. And many of these projects stretch out over many years. So We actually find it's rather useful to think of this grant support as kind of an add-on to an already existing project. So a project that might be moving, might be in the planning phase now, or might even be in some form of implementation phase that could benefit, and project participants are interested in having this added-on involvement of artists and artistic practice as well. So either one is fine. It could be a new project. We aren't necessarily looking for everyone to come up with brand new transportation projects they're looking for support for. It could definitely be things that are already moving forward.
Great. Next question, does this grant fund the design and planning component of a project? And I would say that could fall underneath this grant, just as long as, and I guess the question is as opposed to the execution of the design and planning. What if it's just design and planning but not actually the execution of the project? I think we're really interested in making sure that the community is engaged in these processes. So I would want to ensure that if it's just design and planning, that there's a very concerted community engagement aspect, and that arts and culture is really integrated into design and planning. And I think we'd also be interested to see that there are plans for execution beyond the grant period, because again, we're looking for longevity, for sustainability, and not just one-off plans.
Yeah, and I would just add that planning is a great time to involve. I mean, if any of you have gone into depth in our Scenic Route Guide, a lot of what's discussed in there, a lot of the work we did in our current cities is around the planning process and community engagement process. We definitely think that's a good time to involve this kind of work.
Yeah, and that planning process and engagement process can also take, a fair amount of time. So I think it's very reasonable that a project could be sustained the entire year through planning and engagement. Another question is, do we need to have partner organizations submit letters of support? That is not required. Including the MPO letter of support is not required. I would say if you would like to add that's absolutely fine with us. It is important to us that, as was mentioned earlier in the webinar, that there are genuine partnerships being built. And if a letter of support helps to demonstrate that better for you, by all means, we welcome it. Yeah, there's also a question about if applicants have further questions as you move through the process, as I'm sure many of you will, how do you get in contact with us? And on the screen right now, you'll see that we have a specific email address specifically for these questions. It's 3cgrant@t4america.org. So if anything else comes up throughout the process of thinking through your application, feel free to reach out to us that way. Beth is also asking a question about partners. Do we need a main partner organization, or can we work with multiple organizations? So it's a question about how many different partners can be involved in a single application.
There's no specific rules about that. We'll generally consider whoever submits the application to be the lead applicant, but in terms of how the applicants divide up the work and the funding, that's really up to the applicants themselves. Funding could go directly to one organization, or it could go to more than one. So there's no real rule about that. I think generally a team of 100 partners dividing up the funding might not be as logical or as successful as a group of 2, 3, or 4, perhaps, who are dividing up the funding, since it is not an unlimited amount of funding.
Yeah, there's another question about the size of the community or the population that's proposed. So Emily wants to know if there's a minimum population size. Can we apply as a neighborhood, so very small community? I would say yes, you can apply as a neighborhood. There is no minimum population size. We're pretty open as far as size goes. We're just really looking for applications that are answering that core question of what is the transportation challenge or opportunity, and how is your arts and culture-based solution addressing it? So neighborhoods would be all right. So along the lines of questions about size, Alyssa's asking if it's more helpful or more competitive to see partnerships between smaller, more grassroots organizations and larger organizations, which may be some of the models of some of our current grantees. So the question is that more competitive than perhaps two small organizations working together or two large organizations working together?
Generally, yes, I'd say it is. There's certainly different situations in different cities, and we understand that. So I think maybe to take a step back, the best approach to this is to explain the partnerships that you're submitting. So we, in reviewing these grants, can understand why you have set up your partnerships in the way that you've set them up. And that's really what we'll be judging against is if you explain that you're not able to include a certain partner for pretty logical reasons, then we'll understand that. But in terms of grassroots organizations or advocacy organizations partnering with public agencies, transportation authorities, things like that, that we find can be rather a good way to start the project, since there's policies that are attempting to be changed, and the people who have the power to change them are bought into the concept of the project from the beginning. That will lead to a more streamlined process in the end.
We also have a question about, can we give a really clear example of maybe besides San Diego, a previous successful project under this grant? So talk a little bit about Portland or the work in Nashville.
Yeah, there's a lot we could say. All of our webinars are recorded, and I encourage everyone who's interested to actually go back to a couple of the other ones we've had. Actually, participants from Nashville, from the project along Nolensville Pike in South Nashville, and in Portland in the Jade Midway districts in East Portland, present on a couple past webinars. But just quickly, a couple of things to point out with those projects. In Nashville and South Nashville, a partnership between a group called Conexión Americas, a immigrant services organization, now has a community space along a state highway, a rather busy arterial road called Nolensville Pike, and the Nashville MPO, as well as a number of other partners, including Nashville Civic Design Center and others, got together to run, they called creative labs, these community workshops that were done in culturally specific manner, so that a group working with the Somali community functioned in one way at a specific location that was culturally relevant to that group, with the proper languages being spoken by the people running the meetings. Same is true with the Kurdish community, with the Central American community, and so on and so forth. And it was an untraditional way of running a community engagement process for the city of Nashville and the county of Davidson County. And it led to much more buy-in from the community. It led to more creative ideas, and it led to much more participation from people who had really been left out of the transportation planning conversations in that part of Nashville, a pretty rapidly growing immigrant community. And with working with the Nashville Civic Design Center, came up with some renderings and plans for everything from public art to new bike lanes to bus rapid transit, and then a future light rail line. We helped support them through a anti-displacement plan, so that all the new wonderful, great improvements that they're driving for don't end up having some unintended consequences to the people who are living and working along this corridor. And one of the main things we also focused on was the lack of open space for people to play and to recreate, since it's a pretty busy street, and the improvements that we're working with them to support will take some time, looking also at some off-street places for people to enjoy themselves. Maybe I'll pause there. We can go into some other ones if we have time later, but there's plenty of information also on a recent blog post that both Mallory and I wrote just a few weeks ago on t4america.org, so I recommend you go there and look up some more information about those projects as well.
Thanks, Ben. This question, I think, would be great for Kathleen. Someone is wondering exactly how you utilized your funding very specifically. So they're asking, did you pay artists? Did you buy supplies? How did you use your grant funding?
Yes, all of those things. We've had a lot of flexibility. We hired artists. We've hired the CDC hired Somali organizers to help talk to the Somali population. We've used the funding to also hire a landscape architect to help us with the concept at the gathering place. Lots of events. I think that's it. It's really a great opportunity to think creatively about how to use the funding beyond going to support your organization, which of course is needed, but all of the support that's going into the placemaking is a good resource too. And a video. We've created videos as well.
Yeah, so the uses of the funding is pretty flexible. We've got another question about the actual art making. Do you prefer permanent installment versus temporal artistic activities for placemaking? It's a good question.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that one. I don't think we necessarily have a preference. I think we recognize that with $50,000, the budget of many public art projects is quite larger than that. So we don't necessarily expect and are not judging proposals based on the permanence of the work that's being proposed. It's more about the change in policy in place and other aspects of the work that we're interested in. If one can achieve that through performance, through other temporal activities, and that is great, and we imagine that with the level of support we're offering, that's probably what a lot of this will end up being. Having said that, if there is a proposal for a permanent work of art or other permanent infrastructure that can be accomplished with this funding, and certainly matching funds and other support is welcome, that can be included in the work you do, then that would certainly be okay as well.
We have another question about some of the past work that the subgrantees have done. So the question is, can you identify the transportation challenges very specifically with the other two grantees? They're trying to get a sense of how we specifically define transportation and transportation challenges or opportunities.
Sure. I can define them, but I'll mention before I do that these three projects are just three projects, and so they don't represent the full range of what we would consider a transportation challenge. And there's hundreds of other potential projects that we would be willing to support too. I think in these three projects are all somewhat similar in terms of the kinds of neighborhoods they're located in, the communities that are impacted by the work, and the phase of the transportation work that's happening. The challenge in Portland, I haven't talked about that one yet, was really that there was a plan for a new bus rapid transit line connecting downtown Portland all the way through far eastern Portland into neighboring Gresham. And the community that we're working with in East Portland, Jade Division districts, was not really represented by transportation advocacy organizations, and was sort of getting their feet wet in that kind of advocacy work and learning the lay of the land, and we were offering them support in doing that work, but also trying to help explain how some of the changes that seem like they would be really great, and in many cases were really great for some people, might actually cause some unforeseen problems for the people living in these districts in East Portland. An example of that is that, as many of you listening I'm sure know, with bus rapid transit, one of the key ways of success, of creating a successful bus rapid transit project, is by having stations further apart so buses don't have to stop as frequently and are therefore able to run more quickly. which of course makes sense in many communities, but if you have a community with a number of seniors and elders living in it who are not able to walk the extra 3 or 4 blocks when they've had, and in some cases have chosen to live where they live because of a bus stop right outside, a mere 20 steps away, that transportation project then provides much better and faster access for some people, but actually completely eliminates access to other parts of the city for other people. And so that kind of translational work of telling the story of these people, in some cases through even video and performance, in some cases just through direct action and actually telling the powers that be what is going on, that was one of the real challenges that was overcome, and some of those bus stations have been rearranged through that work in Portland. I'm trying to think if there's any other very specific things to talk about. And Nashville is really more about organizing a community that was largely filled with new Americans, so recent immigrants to the United States, and of course to Nashville, about how to really advocate for the kind of transportation system they want and need, and making those connections between business leaders and other community leaders along this corridor, with the mayor's office, with the MPO, with other authorities who have control of the future of the transportation system, and then getting included in long-term plans so that in the future, when Nashville does build bus rapid transit and light rail, that Nolensville Pike will be included in that construction.
Great. I want to just kind of tackle a few groups of questions that we've gotten from a few different folks. So we're getting the question of size of community that's eligible. Is it only cities? Can it also be suburbs or rural communities? And just to reaffirm that, yes, every size of community is eligible. Rural communities are eligible, even though our past grantees were cities. So everyone from big to small communities are welcome to apply. We've also gotten a few groups of questions about where exactly the funding it can go or has gone in the past. We really don't have limitations on that. So again, we're getting the question of, can we use the funding for programming, or do we have to build structures? And all of that is eligible. So we have a pretty open use of the budget, as long as you have a clear vision of how this is going to help meet that transportation challenge or opportunity using your arts and cultural strategy. We have a specific question from Joel asking, how can these smaller communities be competitive in this grant process? Now, I would say just being very specific about the transportation-related issue at hand, so really identifying that location, the community that's surrounding that, either that location or that particular issue, and also making sure that you've got those deep and genuine partnerships that are starting to form. And we're not looking for partnerships they do not have to be years old, but we want to see that those conversations are starting to happen in the community that you're working in, because the grant period is a year long and the budget is $50,000. So we can't do huge things within that time frame, but we can definitely help you get further along in the process.
I'll just add to that. I think for smaller communities, it might be rather helpful to explain how this grant will support conversations or activities or projects that are already happening, so that it's not, we don't necessarily want a community to think about transportation challenges and transportation solutions for the first time because this grant opportunity came about. We're not suggesting anyone's doing that, but we don't want to see any proposals that make it seem like that's what's happening, but instead that there's conversations and work going towards improving transportation outcomes in a community, and this grant seems like the perfect icing on the cake to help do that either differently or better or in some other way than it's already happening.
This is a question for Kathleen. How do you plan to measure the project's success in San Diego?
That is a great question. We've talked about it with our cohorts. too. Certainly one way is, as Ben mentioned in the other communities, to the degree that we're reaching out or engaging people who have not been traditionally part of the planning process. I think that's a really valuable tool. We don't really have a formal way of evaluating that, but we know from the outreach that we've done that we've been able to engage folks just because of the kinds of engagement that we've done, and it's not circulated to City Heights CDC, but just engaging the Somali community. They had not been traditionally part of other planning processes. I think on the policy side, the fact that we've got a citywide policy that's moving forward that will facilitate more placemaking projects throughout the city. That's another way that we've been able to evaluate our success. But looking at the evaluation was not something that we did formally at the beginning of the project. It's something that we're doing more towards the end. So it's still a work in progress.
So we're not necessarily requiring either quantitative or qualitative measurement. I would say it would be a good exercise to think through both of those types of measurement and see what makes the most sense for your very specific proposal. So if your transportation-related challenge is safety, then I would be thinking about measurement tactics that specifically relate back to safety and the issues related to safety. We also have a question about matching funds. Are matching funds required for the RFP, and do these need to be detailed in the application?
No, they are not required. It's not a matching grant, so there's no requirement for that. And that reminds me of something I was going to say earlier about how funds can be spent. And the 3 communities we're supporting now have done this all a little bit differently. In some cases, there was a real staffing shortage, and so some of the funds were used to actually bring on additional staff to complete the work. In some cases, it was expertise, certain kind of expertise that was missing, as Kathleen mentioned, bringing on architects and artists, or people from different communities to serve as liaisons. So it's pretty open, and the way in which those funds are funds are used will likely depend on where matching funds are, what else is already being supported. So if you already have staffed organizations supporting a project, you might not need as much support going towards staff and so on and so forth. So we'll be looking at that as well when we review these applicants. If we're looking at a bunch of organizations that seem to be well staffed and well organized and well supported, and they're proposing putting the money towards hiring additional staff, we need to see an explanation as to why that's really important.
Could I say one more thing that relates to the evaluation and to just how the funding can be spent? Another commonality among the 3 pilot organizations or pilot cities right now is conducting or completing these demonstration kinds of events, and that's, as the other question came up, as are these physical art projects, or can it be the programmatic sort of engagement? And yes, to both of those things. It doesn't have to be physical art, of course, in this project. And so we found that with the demonstration project, at least that we did in San Diego, we've done 2, we were able to measure, again, who was coming out to that, and then also how many people were coming out to that to learn about the placemaking kinds of projects or interest in the neighborhood.
Thanks, Kathleen.
In the last couple of minutes, I just want to make one other quick point, and that is that successful projects don't actually need to result in a final work of art or a performance of art or anything of that sort. It could be very much embedded in the process. So if there's a proposal that says our challenge is that we have a high number of pedestrian fatalities at a certain intersection or a couple intersections, and we're looking to solve that problem and want a creative solution to it, then certainly the end product might be something involving design or performance or work of art, or it might be that the planning process and engaging people in the conversation about what is really causing the problem there could be a very creative process and can involve artists. and the end result might be something that DPW does relative to redesigning the street that might not look like a work of art in the end. So both process and final product can be included in this artistic work.
Thanks, Ben, for rounding that out. We are going to be respectful of everyone's time here and to see if our speakers have any final additional comments before we close out here. Kathleen or Ben, any final comments or thoughts?
None for me.
I guess my final thought, besides the final thought I just gave, was to think really creatively. We're interested in really exciting ideas, and of course we keep saying, of course, listen to what Kathleen had to say and what our other partners in other cities have done. But we don't necessarily want you to pitch the exact same project to us based on that. We're looking for exciting new ideas and ideas that are really relevant to the community in which you're submitting the proposal from. So think creatively.
Actually, if I can just say one more thing, building on the previous comment from Ben, is again, when you're thinking creatively, it's not just about physical projects. It is about that really authentic, careful, thoughtful engagement process, and thinking about it completely differently, and even hiring artists to think about it differently than what traditional outreach methods have been.
And then my final comment will just be creative and imaginative in your project scoping and in your application, but also try to simultaneously be very specific about what problem you're solving, what sort of tools you want to be bringing in to help solve that problem, and specifically the community that you want to be engaging in this process. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us today on this webinar. Everyone who is registered for the webinar will receive a recording of the webinar, and that email will also include a link to the application, which is available as well on the Transportation for America website. And just a reminder that the deadline for this application is June 2nd, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, so remember that time zone difference. And if you do have any final questions after today, feel free to email us at 3cgrant@t4america.org. It's back up on the webinar screen right now, 3cgrant@t4america.org, and we will also include that information in that final email. Great. So good luck to everyone. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.